All right. We're moving over to you now, Peter, to give us an update on your district goals, your mid-year update.
We have given you the document, which is the beginning of the year goals with the mid-year update column for your review prior to the meeting. The goal of this meeting is just to answer any questions you might have about progress we've made based on what's in the document. And if you have any feedback on those district goals, certainly welcome to hear that tonight.
Anybody have feedback or questions on the goals? And I just got a message from our secretary that says we're back. So welcome back to those who are joining us online. We apologize for the technical difficulties. Thank you very much to the AB technical staff for coming in and saving the day. Maybe you can train us on how to fix that later, Peter. Oh.
As soon as it starts flashing, it's gone.
It's on its way out. So for those who are watching online, we may lose you again, and we apologize. All right, so back to any feedback on the mid-year goal update. All right, thank you. Seeing none, we're going to move on to our next agenda item, which is our FY26 preliminary budget discussion. So as a reminder, we did meet on Saturday, February 8th was our budget Saturday. On that, the next time we meet, it will be March 30th. Is that the recommended budget? It's not at our next meeting, but it's the following meeting?
30th is Sunday, which
so
I
it's
know
not the 30th.
27th?
13th is the first, is the budget hearing, and your first preview as we've gone to the recommended budget. And then on March 20th is your scheduled budget vote for the final school committee budget vote.
Right, so our next meeting, which is March 13th, is our budget hearing. The following meeting, we will have the recommended budget from the superintendent. What I was trying to line up here is that there are not significant changes to the budget as it was presented to us on Budget Saturday. We'll see the next iteration of that in the recommended budget on the 20th of March. So really, this is just an opportunity for committee members to provide any additional input, any questions regarding the budget. We did have a pretty good discussion at the end of the meeting regarding some of our next steps, and I think that's another area that we can discuss in terms.
So there are no updates to the budget that we had presented. That will come on March 13th when we come back to you. However, you did increase our insurance that had gone off insurance right now for individuals, and so we had I think it was 6 more people over the last week or so. We ended up placing out of district, and so we've been able to make changes within the budget not to reduce any more staff, but there's no flexibility in terms of being able to add anything back from what you had added into the budget at the last meeting. So we're kind of really in a holding pattern right now in terms of, the overall number is the number. But it's certainly something our leadership team spent a lot of time talking about and thinking about all the different options that we had about what we might come to you with. But in the end, we can't really recommend that you add anything back because we've had the additional expenses that came in that have to be accounted for.
Thanks, Peter.
Very concerned about the special ed coordinator position at McCarthy Town. And I think we've heard a lot about it. And I know that we discussed this at Budget Saturday, but, I personally am going to be having more conversations with folks about that. And so I just want to register my deep concern. I mean, obviously Compass is a unique program, and I've heard enough specifics to have deep concern about cutting that, recognizing we don't have a money tree, but that's what I want to say.
Thank you. Other comments? Any thoughts on some of the restructuring? I can share that, I can reiterate what Peter said, which is we are looking at getting some outside help on that. So there'll be an RFP that we'll be able to bring to you to provide some input on. One of the things I'd like the committee to start thinking about is the speed at which we do something like this. So we're in the position we're in right now for next school year. If we get proposals and we start the process and we wanted something for FY27, we'd have to have a decision and a plan all done by December of 25 to be able to put in place for 27. And we're talking about probably some pretty significant changes. What we need to balance with is input from the community, the ability for everybody to understand what those options are, provide their input, versus another year of declining resources and funding. So I think it's something worth considering, talking about now, talking about at our workshop, and as we consider proposals.
I think that is a really good point. I think it behooves us to move as quickly as we can, considering, the unknowns out there. Hearing that more people are coming back on the health insurance does not surprise me, seeing what I see with my insurance out there in the world. One thing that I would like to see with restructuring that conversation and, the idea of hiring another consultant is maybe trying something a little bit different. I think historically we have not prioritized teacher and staff input in the way that we should, considering they're the ones doing the jobs, they're the professionals, they're the ones that know best. And so I think maybe this would be a good opportunity to, more heavily utilize their input to make sure any, big changes that are made from a very thoughtful, like, these are the people that are going to be in the buildings servicing, these kids.
I agree with that, but I think that if I understand this correctly, what we're talking about is somebody to evaluate what big structural changes are potentially available that would come with them a significant enough cost savings to justify deviating from where we are, or is that incorrect?
So I think, as I think about this, we're running 9 facilities right now, right? But one is essentially self-funded when we talk about the preschool because it's tuition-based or it's covered in special education costs. Outside of that, we're running 8 facilities. We have gone down, 600 students just in 8 years, but it's actually more than that if you go back earlier than regionalization. And we're going to go down in enrollment more. I think, from my perspective looking at it, and we, through the work we did with Nate Levinson and NASK 12, his look at the district was, how can you be as efficient as possible with resources so that you keep your structures the same? And we heard a lot of feedback from staff about the challenges with efficiency and why that may not be the most desirable thing, because it would have impact on, program services, things like that for kids. And we heard that through that budgeting study process. I think we're at a place where to try and operate the number of educational programs we have, and if we keep reducing from that, we're at a place where we don't have the resources and we're spreading ourselves too thin. I think, if something doesn't give, i.e. we get more revenue or, something breaks in our favor or we get more kids, then trying to go to a smaller district, we're able to actually focus those resources a little bit better. There are also structures that could be looked at where, and this is quite honestly why I chose not to say, I think we should close a school. Because all that does is pit, 5 communities against one, and it's not going to be a productive conversation. That could certainly be an outcome of something, but there were many, many more possible outcomes that the community should explore. My own take is we should actually start by bringing together a stakeholder group that includes our staff. Families have a huge stake in how we organize our schools. I think there needs to be a lot of family voice, a lot of staff voice, get people around the table, and talk about who are the kids we're serving right now, what are the goals we have for our students, how do we need to serve them, and what are the resources we need. What is our overall vision for what an excellent comprehensive education looks like that we want to make sure we preserve? And then have a real understanding and a reckoning of what are the resources of the community and what are those going to look like over the next handful of years. And then simultaneously looking at what are all the different educational models out there that could be an option, and then do really a matching exercise. What are the options that are out there that are most likely to give us what we want? There's no perfect model. We don't have one now. We've talked about different challenges we have in the model we have, but it's what we have for a lot of good reasons. But there are other options too. And if we don't have the resources to fully staff our schools the way that we think we need to, something has to change for us, because we can't just keep cutting every year. I mean, I think that's my bottom line in all of this. It's leading to a lot of frustration. People don't feel like they can do their jobs as well as they want. We've heard from educators that it's one thing to learn, new literacy and math curriculum, but if the next year, and quite honestly, people are changing grade levels, it's not just money, it's actually enrollment, that we don't have enough enrollment to fully section our schools out the way they were designed to be. But if people are bumping grade levels, 2 years after you learned an entire new curriculum, you go and feel like a novice again for 3 years because you have to learn everything all over again at a new grade level. That's really taking a toll on educators as well, at least some of the ones that I've talked to. So I think, my goal is going through this process that I know is going to be challenging for the community, but to come out with something more stable, and where what we have as facilities and schools and programs feel like they're better resourced on the other end. So it's not just a cost savings measure, it's a consolidation measure designed to better focus the resources that we have. Sorry for the long-winded explanation.
And I think what I would add, and where my concern about some of this friction comes from, is the need to act quickly because we're at such a dire situation, but also the lessons we've learned over the past 7 years for me, Ginny, for the time you've been on the committee as well. These are changes where a lot of stakeholders have opinions, and we need to have an opportunity for those people to be heard, but we also need to be able to act in a way that stems the bleeding that we have right now. That's kind of, I kind of want to name it now. I want everyone to talk about that. I want as many people to know, and again, hopefully we're broadcasting live, as many people to know what we're thinking about, what we're talking about, because we want all the input, and we don't want to be called out for acting too quickly, but we also can't act so slow that we have to go through another cycle like this. So that's my concern. I think what we're looking at, and we'll see more when we get an RFP, is a proposal around community visioning, but in a compressed timeline that allows us to get to a decision quickly as possible. I'm going to go to Ben.
I just wanted to add a little.
Okay, I'll go to you, and then I'll go to Ben, and then Tori.
Sorry, not to interrupt other people, but I just wanted to add to that, just to be super specific for people listening, the idea of just closing Conant keeps coming up, and that seems like such an easy solution. But other districts structure themselves totally differently. Some have schools that are K-2 and then 3-5. So there really are other options out there. We don't need to just jump to that just because it seems like an easy one.
So one question I have is, we're talking about compressed timelines. We're talking about stemming the bleeding. I'm looking out at what's going on nationally and a compressed timeline to stem the bleeding. What are the risks for us? We've heard about the risks if we don't change, but what are the risks that we may find if we go too fast or too slow?
It's a great question, and I think what Peter and I were talking about just yesterday in terms of the structure of the RFP is to put out 2 different timelines, to have those proposals come back with something for FY27 and something for FY28. And maybe as part of the evaluation of the proposals, we look at potential risks. Because, I mean, we could come up with a whole bunch of those risks, but I think that there's an opportunity for us to do that maybe as we workshop some of the things that we want to get done for next year. But yeah, it's a great question, and I think it's something that we need to consider as we move the process forward.
So, as I told you after Budget Saturday, if you want to just lock everybody in the room with an endless supply of coffee, I'm in. That's, we can make that happen. We want to turn this thing, let's do it. But seriously, I think, Becca, your point is really well taken about the value of having our educators involved in this process. And I think one of my biggest takeaways from what we did with the Elementary Budget Task Force was the ability for everybody in the room to learn from our educators what school looks like now. Because we all have our own frames of reference, right? And that's not necessarily what people are experiencing. So I think that's really important. And as we talk about timing, I know one of the biggest struggles was when we met. And it could make for some really long days for people. Sometimes it was a conflict and people couldn't make it. And I'm wondering, as we figure out what this compressed timeline looks like, how we can get that sweet spot where we can really get all the people in the room that we want to, because educators was one of the places we fell short. We couldn't get everyone in there that we wanted to because there were just people who couldn't make the time and place that we were doing it. And I guess my other thought that is out there is expectation management. At the end of the Budget Task Force, I felt like we had all really looked at open enrollment as something that, we could make a change and we were going to find savings there. And when we didn't, it was disappointing. It was hard. It made what we came up with even more difficult because it was all staff-based. And so now, I hear what we're thinking about, big changes. There are other ways we could do business. They could save us money. Operational word there being could. They might not. And I think the other piece of this discussion has to be, if we go through this process and what we come out of this with is we are at the best organization, then the follow-on is we have to come back to our communities and make sure that they are funding us at the level we need in order to be providing the education that our communities expect. So it's a big unknown. We don't know that answer, but we can't promise that by going through this process, we are going to find savings. We might not.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a great point, and I think that's why as we work to do the outreach to build the group that's doing this visioning, the community at large needs to be a part of that. And, I think part of the output from the Budget Task Force this year was at least getting some of, what we might have considered budget skeptics in the room with budget advocates and with educators so that there is that experience sharing. And so I think if we can broaden that group and get a bunch of people together to understand so that, people who say, we're top heavy, we have too many administrators, can get in the room with someone who said, I had to restrain a kid today and it hurt. I think that's an important opportunity for the community to hear that as well.
The other thing that I want to make sure that we're keeping in mind, especially when voicing to the community, we are going to go through this process. We are going to take in, different ideas, and it could very well be that the option that we come up with has a capital expense up front to be able to, if we wound up switching to, a K through 2 and, switching these around, there's going to be desks that are needed. There's going to be, structural costs involved with that as well. So I just want to make sure that that's something that we're also bearing in mind. It's not going to be like, hey, we snap our fingers and all of a sudden, we're saving millions of dollars and we're able to do this much more efficiently. It's going to be painful to make the change regardless.
I agree. Let's be completely honest. When this process is over, be it in a year or 2 years, not everyone is going to be happy, and in many cases, no one is going to be elated, and lots of people are going to be disgruntled. And it's the level of displeasure that they'll have that I think we need to manage, because we're tasked with the responsibility of making sure that our district lasts for the long run. Leela.
Just a quick comment, and then just trying to get clarity. I'm wondering how the vision of a graduate can be a starting point for thinking about what is the education that we want to have in this district. And and then I've gotten some questions, and I think you spoke to it, but just so we can be explicit, that none of this restructuring is happening in this next school year, correct? Like, we're
Correct.
planning for it,
We're planning for it.
but schools are not going to look vastly different next year,
No,
next
not
school
at
year.
all.
Yeah, no, just to clarify, there are no changes to our current school configuration plan for next school year. The earliest that this would take place would be fall 2026 for the 2026-27 school year. And, I think, the comment that there could be some capital changes that are needed in order to accommodate an educational program is true. And, depending on what the nature of those changes are, that might also have to play a factor in what the final timeline for anything would be. I think as well, as I've been thinking about this more, and I mentioned this earlier, but I think we need to think of this not only just as a reorganization, but this really needs to be the strategy of the district over the next several years, because there's a lot. It's one thing to say we're just going to change the school programs, but any change to our school programs means massive operational changes that actually would need to take place. I'll give you one example right off the bat is report cards. If we went from 6 elementary programs to 5 elementary programs, they each have their own report card system right now. And, depending on which program closed and which stayed open, it could be possible that a third of an existing school now has a third of another school in it that didn't select that educational program as their top choice and is not used to those report cards. And I talk about that from a staff perspective and a student perspective. And family expectations. And I think there could be wild differences in expectations among families and staff going into any type of a change like that actually need a lot of runway and need to be well thought out. So I just want to give you that one example, but there are dozens of examples that we could talk about that would need to get impacted by something. We're not alone in this. There are other districts that are doing similar work. Shrewsbury has done some work around this. Andover's currently doing the same work, and they've been going through a fairly extensive but also time-constrained process to do this. There are districts in other states that I've talked to where, part of their actual consideration of reconfiguration is an expansion of the district to other communities. And they've actually found multiple communities that were interested in regionalizing into a larger district to save on the overhead of central office. So, there's lots of different options, and quite honestly, I think the best decision is going to be made if we're willing to take a step back and start with a completely fresh slate and examine all of the possible options and then figure out what's best for us.
Liz?
Okay, so what's next? What do we do, tomorrow?
Thank you.
Where can I get a link to have?
Task-oriented.
Yes.
I love it. So what's next is let me rephrase that. The superintendent's office is feverishly working to put together a request for proposals so that we can go out to consultants who have experience in this. The hope is that by our next meeting on the 13th, we'll have a draft of that RFP that we can provide some feedback on. In parallel to the process of setting out RFPs, waiting the requisite amount of time to get those proposals and evaluating those, we're going to have our workshop on April 3rd. And so our workshop will spend a bit of time thinking about, in addition to restructuring, what are some of the other big things that we maybe want to tackle and how do we go about doing that? And then we'll spend some of our time digging a little bit more into how do we go about putting together the action plan around the consultant and the RFP that's going out. Again, depending on time, we'll then have proposals come in. We'll probably need to put together a group to evaluate those proposals, and then we will have finalists potentially come and speak to us at the committee before we select a finalist to then be our consultant for this program. My hope is that by the end of this school year, and sometime between, and we'll get to this in a little bit, sometime between when our new committee members are seated and the end of the school year, we will know who our consultant is, and we will put together whatever sort of advisory group from the school committee side is in place for that, so that potentially there can be work done this summer. Is that tick box enough for you?
Yes. And what does RFP stand for?
RFP is a request for proposals.
Great, thank you.
Yes, thank you. Other questions or comments from the committee? All right. Any last comments on, sort of rewind a little bit, our budget for next year? All right. We're going to move on then to subcommittee member reports. Policy subcommittee. Liz?
I prepared a thing. I'm going to send it to Beth. The policy subcommittee met Friday, February 7th at 7:30 a.m. via Zoom. We took a first look at a financial assistance policy. This is a practice that the district has already been participating in, but we currently do not have a specific policy around it, so we're getting started. Our next meeting is tomorrow, February 28th at 7:30 a.m. via Zoom, and we intend to review the feedback on the discipline policy, which we heard here tonight, and also continue our work on the graduation requirements for the district.
Thank you. Questions or comments for Liz on policy? Tori?
So I really appreciate that the competency determination thing is moving its way along. It's really complicated. It's got a short timeline, and I just want to say, first off, I appreciate the whole policy crew for working on this and figuring it out. I've been watching this at state level and following other districts, and for some it seems like this is an easy thing to figure out. But I don't think they have the complexity of some of the students we have in our district, between our multilingual learners and some of our in-house special ed programs. And so I have some questions because I think this is going to be really important for a small group of students, and we need to make sure that whatever we come up with works for everybody. So I'm hoping that as you finalize the version that comes to the full school committee, you could look at, first of all, being able to articulate for us, are we changing what the graduation standards are? So by that I mean, if you applied this policy to a set of recent graduating classes, for whom would it have made a different outcome and how? How will we ensure that our students who are seeking to earn a high school diploma either have access to the courses necessary to graduate or have some alternative to demonstrate competency if they haven't taken a typical course pathway? And in this case, I'm thinking especially of like our multilingual students who might have a disrupted schooling background. I'm thinking of our special education students who may have been off-ramped from the standard curriculum as early as 7th grade and who may have asked to take some of these classes and may have been told that we're not ready for you to do that yet. Students who are in the pre-ETS, the Employment Transition Services Program, who can work towards a diploma until they're 22, but they're also working internships that go from 9 to 5. And so if they need to take specific classes in the high school to earn a diploma, they can't do that with the waterfall schedule. So how are we going to think about them? If you've read the article that was in the MASC news summary today, you may have noticed there is state-level concern about both the long-term and unintended consequences of the policy change for specific cases, kind of the things that I've been mentioning. And so my other question is, what are the unknown unknowns? Have we talked to the families who have students that are in these specific cases, not just for the ones who'd be eligible to graduate this year, but the ones who are in the pipeline, to understand where there are some obstacles that we may not have anticipated. And when they see this, they'll go, wait a minute, there's no way my kid could ever meet this. If we have that conversation ahead of time, I think we'll probably be a lot happier. Data-wise, I'm hoping that when we have the presentation, you'll be able to share the number of students who achieved competency in recent years by passing the MCAS ALT, the portfolio method, or by the high school principal's approval of having met the educational proficiency plan. The number of students who passed an MCAS test without taking an MCAS 10th grade course in that subject, and then the converse, the number of students who've passed a 10th grade class in a subject and not actually passed the MCAS. Because I think this highlights that passing a standardized test and taking a year-long course for some students are functionally very different requirements. And that's especially true for some of our most vulnerable students. So the policies, requirements, and how we provide those pathways to access these courses matter. And it's going to impact not only the students that we're thinking about graduating this year, but students for years to come until we've fully addressed access to these necessary courses to graduate. We're potentially not only moving the finish line mid-race, but also rerouting the entire race course behind our runners and then disqualifying them because they didn't run that route. And that just doesn't seem fair. So that's my ask. Those are the hard questions that I'll have, and I just want to make sure you have those ahead of time so that we're not up against a deadline and everyone's like, Tori, why didn't you tell me you were worried about this ahead of time? And I can send those to you if you would like me to. Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Tori. Please.
Tori, I appreciate that, and I think one of the challenging things for us is the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education still hasn't even amended their regulations to reflect this. And so what's happening, I mean, the way this all played out is extraordinarily problematic because everyone knew the game that we all had to play, and then it changed, but it's impacting kids in the middle of a school year. And so even though the ballot initiative passed in November, we didn't get our initial guidance from DESE, I think, until December 17th. And then DESE has to actually amend their regulations for the new requirements, take out all the references to MCAS as a graduation requirement, but now create another set of regulations in parallel to that, which, are remarkably close to what we're proposing. I think we're really sensitive to that, and I think Joni and her team and Gabby are working really closely to do an analysis at the student level for students who might be on that bubble, so as to not create a new standard, but instead try and reflect through what we've done, what the standard is for students. And I think in particular, we're sensitive to a couple of things. One is creating a standard that is commensurate with what MCAS is, having an alternate pathway to being able to reach that outside of just high school coursework, because we recognize that that may not be within everyone's grasp. But at the same time, what we don't want to do is create a lower standard by which some students get passed along through the system who may not yet actually be ready to graduate. And so I think trying to consider all of those, it's a slow process, and it requires, quite honestly, data analysis at the student level. I know the high school special education coordinator has been working with Joni and her team, all the department leaders, with Gabby, to really look hard at each individual student case and try and make some determinations. And so one of the goals would be that if a student would not have been ready to receive a diploma prior to, if MCAS was still the standard, they should probably not be receiving that diploma now. But if a student would have been able to achieve the diploma by graduation, we want to make sure we have a pathway for them to be able to proceed as well. And so I think that's the challenge that we're trying to navigate at this point.
Thanks, Peter. All right. Budget Subcommittee.
It says on here that the Budget Subcommittee met on the 10th as well, and we did not. We met on the 24th, this past Monday at 2 p.m. on Zoom. We discussed the upcoming Boxborough Finance Committee presentation that Adam was about to embark on. And then we, discussed a lot of the same things we've talked about tonight, sort of next steps in terms of hiring a consultant and looking into bigger restructuring efforts, how we did not have the ability to add staff back into the budget. And then, we've started talking about discussing with the town, possibly, changing the funding model, seeing where that leads us, maybe seeing if we can access some more funds here at home, as well as the efforts that we're all undertaking. And by all, I mean, I hope all of us, emailing our representatives, bothering the heck out of everybody to say, we need more money, this funding model does not work. And then we've also discussed, sort of our relationship with the town in terms of, support for various projects they have going on, like the DPW building, stuff like that, and sort of, how our collaboration is going to look in the future. Our next meeting is March 10th at 2 p.m. on Zoom. It's also a Monday, and we don't have the agenda for that yet, so I can't give you a preview.
I bet we'll be talking about the FY26 budget.
Probably.
Thank you. Capital Subcommittee, Ben.
All right. The Capital Subcommittee met this morning at 7:30 a.m. to discuss the FY25 projects and the long-range capital plan regarding the 25 projects. FY25 projects, they include the Blanchard School playground, the admin building roof, now over 35 years old, I might add, which is slated to start repairs during April vacation, along with the Hager Well project and the high school chem storage project. Meanwhile, at the junior high, the controls program is ongoing in the engineering phase. However, I do have some good news to report. At the Parker Damon School, we will be replacing the chillers with hybrid air source heat pumps through an existing vendor, Train, utilizing the Mass Save program, which will help defray the cost of the installation of the units, and the estimated cost would only be $500,000, helping to advance our carbon neutral and net zero goals. Lastly, the subcommittee also reviewed the long-range capital plan, which included priorities for FY26, 27, and beyond, and we voted on posting that plan on the school's website. Lastly, we had a discussion briefly about accelerating our bonding due to some changes going on Capitol Hill based off of some meetings I had earlier this week in Washington, D.C. That being said, we will be advancing something in the upcoming school committee meetings, but first, in order to do so, we will be meeting Wednesday, March 12th to discuss that bonding issue directly.
Great, thank you. Please.
Just a couple things to make you aware of, and some of these are even late breaking from when Capitol Sub met. But, one important thing is that we are awaiting payment on a $2.75 million IRS tax credit for the work at the geothermals for the Boardwalk campus. That from all of the work that Sherry's done to try and chase this down, it is in the approved status, but we haven't actually gotten the payment in our account yet. So I know Sherry's checking on that daily. That's significant. Because one of the really critical projects we have coming up within the next year or so is the replacement of all of the rooftop units on the high school. That's probably a $3.5 to almost $4 million project, and we're counting on that money as significant seed money to be able to get us to that. So that's out there. MSBA reimbursement for the final portion of Boardwalk. We are scheduled for, at this point, the August MSBA board meeting. So we should be receiving $1 million roughly for the final reimbursement payment from MSBA for Boardwalk. That has long been targeted to buy down the debt from the short-term borrowing that you've approved, the $5 million borrowing, before we go out for a long-term strategy. We actually want to use that MSBA payment to pay it down, but we're also trying to play out timing with some of the changes at the federal level around municipal bond rates, because they could end up spiking soon. So we're watching that carefully. The other piece that we're watching over at Boardwalk campus is several of the monitoring wells for the septic system have been returning extremely high levels of nitrogen, and we're monitoring that because it is possible that we might have to install a nitrogen treatment plant for that. That's probably $750,000 to $1 million, somewhere in that range. We do have $1 million left from the building project sitting in that capital account that can only be used for the building project. We're going to be talking with Capital Sub about that, but that would be a very appropriate use of building project money, is to finish the project so that the district itself is not assuming additional liability. It's not going to reduce the bonding that we have to do, but that has to happen if and when that takes place. We are doing additional well monitoring testing over the course of this spring on a monthly basis for the identified wells, and then Board of Health will probably tell us late spring or early summer what we're going to need to do with that. So there's a lot in flux right now that we're watching that we want you to be kind of generally aware of, and when something's critical, we're certainly going to bring it to you as a need for action.
Thank you, Peter. Any other questions or comments on Capitol? All right. Let's get some updates from Acton Select Board. Ben.
All right. The Acton Select Board met on February 24th, this past Monday. I watched it via Zoom since I was down in D.C. To address a range of town matters, including a legislative update from our state representatives, a joint discussion on the housing production plan with the planning board, and an update on Habitat for All initiative and the tree clearing bylaw. The board also approved several key items, including a site plan permit, special permit for 358A and 358B Great Road, a waiver of building permit fees for the Acton Food Pantry renovation, and a whole host of other information, including the DPW facility that we discussed earlier. A full recording of this is found on ActonTV's YouTube page. And also a request for the Silver Unicorn Bookstore Festival was brought up during that, too.
Thank you. Finance Committee.
The Acton Finance Committee most recently met on Tuesday, the 25th at 7:30 at the Town Hall. There wasn't a ton to report. There's interest in discussing and making a policy about overrides for the future, especially with all of the unknowns sort of like looming on the horizon. It would be nice to know that the process is as transparent as possible, people are alerted as early as possible, and it becomes a real whole community, effort. So that was sort of the initial discussion of that. And then the ongoing conversation about the DPW building. We did hear from David Martin on the select board about that. And they are going to meet again. They don't have it listed yet, but I believe they're going to meet on the 11th, March 11th at 7:30 at the town hall.
Thank you. I'll report out on the Boxborough Select Board. They met this Monday. Highlights included going through countless warrant articles and voting their recommendations on that. I will admit to leaving early because I did not need to hear all of that information. But at the beginning of the meeting, we did confirm that we are reconvening the Boxborough Leadership Forum, which will be a place for the leadership inside Boxborough to talk about pressing topics in town, most of which include budget concerns around a new firehouse, which would be debt excluded, and the levy limit that we're getting pretty close to. That was it for that. I'll let Liz report on the Boxborough Finance Committee and our performance there the other evening.
The Boxborough Finance Committee met on Tuesday, February 26th at 7 p.m. at the Boxborough Town Hall. Representatives of our committee, as well as Peter and Sherry, were in attendance. Peter gave a detailed presentation on our budget, how we got there, and what we expect the future budget drivers to be. The committee they also voted warrant articles for annual and special town meeting for May. Their next meeting is expected to be Tuesday, March 11th at 7 p.m. in the Grange Room of Town Hall, and I do think that our presentation was very well received.
I would agree. And good feedback on the conversation we had, similar to tonight, around our restructuring ideas.
Yep.
Okay.
I also call it our presentation, even though I just sat there.
You did a great job sitting there. ALG is next. Tori and Yenshin.
So ALG met 7:30 a.m. on February 12th at Acton's Town Hall and on Zoom. During the fiscal year 25 update, Peter mentioned just what he mentioned to us, the freezes on federal funding that could affect opportunities the district is hoping to pursue, but that don't affect the fiscal year 25 budget. During public comment and ALG discussion, members of the Select Board and the Finance Committee expressed appreciation for the district's Budget Saturday presentation and support for funding the preliminary budget, which resulted in a deficit of $130,000 in the ALG model. Combined with a 14.8% increase to health insurance rate for town employees, which is about $160K, that led to a total shortfall of $290K. ALG members reached consensus that the deficit should be covered from one or more of the options available to the town, such as using some of the untaxed levy limit, increasing the amount of net state aid reflected in the model, using free cash, or reducing the municipal budget. Additionally, the Finance Committee continues to advocate for a municipal budget closer to 3% and raise the question of whether there's a need to discuss future override planning if the town and the school district cannot continue with 3% budgets. The pressure statewide on towns and districts from Chapter 70 funding covering less and less of what is needed to fund education was also a topic of discussion. Finally, the size and scope of the proposed DPW building remains unresolved, with the possibility that this issue may not reach consensus before town meeting for the first time in ALG's 40-year history. The next ALG meeting is next Tuesday, March 4th at 7:30 a.m. at Acton Town Hall and on Zoom, and Yenshin and I have questions that we'd like some input on. So a couple things that came to mind. One, should we propose a coordinated school committee, select board, FinCom effort to influence state legislators about revising the Chapter 70 funding formula, along with interim measures to support towns and school districts? Two, should we participate in discussions about future budget modeling limitations and potential need for overrides? I think, Becca, that's along what came up in the FinCom meeting. And three, how should we respond to consenting building efforts regarding the DPW building cost?
All right, so I'll step in for just a second. So typically, the way the ALG process works, and I've only been there as an observer, is that our representatives to the ALG will have questions and they'll go back to their representative boards and get some consensus from the board. So we're not going to necessarily vote on anything here, but we're going to have a conversation. We're going to give some guidance back to Yenshin and Tori when they go back to ALG to say, I spoke to my board and this was their sense, this was their consensus on that. So that's what you're asking us for. Let's start with number one, which is, do we want to work with the town select board and finance committee on advocacy for Chapter 70 funding? Is that?
Yes.
So first, that was the question, right, Tori? Yes. There's a very loud consensus for those of you on YouTube, loud consensus to one side of me. Leela, you have a comment.
I would love for us to float that, but maybe not say specifics around what that'll look like, because there are multiple bills with multiple approaches, and it's unclear which might have a better chance of getting somewhere.
I'm gonna add to that question. Considering the advocacy is around school funding, is it something that our legislative liaisons in our committee take the lead on and work with the other two boards in the town? And I say that volunteering you two, but Ginny, you blew out my eardrum saying, yes, we should work with them, so I think you'll support that. Yeah, right. So I think, Tori, the consensus is yes, and we would be happy to sort of act as the focal point for that and support the other two boards. The second was whether or not we need to work to build consensus around procedures for overrides and debt exclusions, is that right?
Yeah, the way it was phrased in the ALG was future budget modeling limitations and the potential need for overrides. And I think that's grown a little since people have had time to think about it.
Any thoughts or comments?
Peter actually had a really nice slide in the presentation that you gave to the Boxborough Finance Committee, sort of like looking at the next 3 years and talking about like what budget drivers are going to be important. That might be something that could be helpful for you to share. The other thing that I think would be helpful to bring up to ALG is that we're looking to evaluate potential structural changes. We're looking to evaluate that soon, and that could completely upend the way that the expected modeling is going to look.
And to echo back Liz's point from before, there may be capital expenses involved with that. Yeah.
You know, one more consideration to think about is that if the complexity of the change exceeds our ability to do it on a fast timeline, then the district is going to need a runway, because I think in all of this, what we don't want to do is decimate all of our existing programs while we wait to be able to do something different.
Good feedback, you guys, for the ALG? Yeah, so the third one, that's the hot potato. The ALG is looking for some input from the committee, if the committee has any, on the size, scale, scope of the Acton DPW. So I'll provide my view, which is we are extremely grateful to the town of Acton for their support last year in our override and being able to fund our budget year over year. And we understand that the residents and community members in Acton have a need for other facilities. But again, this is my view, is that the size and scope and scale of that is kind of outside the realm of our purview, other than to say, we've just been talking about restructuring and capital costs and a runway and all of that. So I think what we can share to the ALG is all of the things that we're looking at sort of inside our purview, and hope that through the ALG process, there's some consensus around how that DPW fits into that from the community's perspective, ability to fund and getting what they need and want. But again, personally, and I'll look for other people to provide their input, I don't necessarily know if it's within our scope to make a comment on the size of a DPW building. We do obviously have an opinion on the fuel depot because we make use of it, but that building itself, I think, is probably better left to the town to decide, knowing what our limitations and our needs will be in the future.
I think one of the tricky things, and I'm sure this probably came up, is because some of us are from Boxborough, and so they are not really affected by the DPW building, and it complicates things if, they were to weigh in, just like if us Acton folk were to weigh in on their fire station. That being said, personally, I'm happy to make my opinion known, and I feel like I have made it known that I think it's a workers' rights issue. I'm deeply concerned about the people that we expect to work in those conditions, and, for all of our tax money, we want services, right? We want sidewalks. We want somewhere to put our trash, somewhere that gives us salt and sand on a snowy day. But, we also acknowledge all the budget implications thereof. So I don't know if they're going to get the answer that they'd like because we're a mixed group here, and that just makes it so much more complicated. But I'm interested to know what other people think.
Anyone else have any input? All right. I hope we gave you what you needed for your next ALG meeting.
So basically, we will continue to say absolutely nothing on the DPW building because we can't figure this out either.
I think I'll repeat myself, we're very grateful to the town of Acton for, yes. All right. Moving on from one uncomfortable conversation to another, joint PTSO. So we did get a letter, and I think you all received it from the joint PTSO. Everybody except Tori, because Tori's email from the shell isn't working right now. So the joint PTSO, let me just see nods. Everyone else got the email? Okay. So we have had absence of school committee members at the joint PTSO meetings the past few instances, and the joint PTSO is a little concerned about that, rightfully so. What I will put out there is, again, I recognize that everybody has very busy schedules and commitments, and sometimes maybe even having 3 people on that committee is even harder because we don't know who owns the ball at that point. Is there anything that we want to do to change that? Do we want to appoint one person? Do we want to change who it is? Thoughts, comments?
I feel that the whole year has been a bit of a mess. I think that we were trying to switch to a different structure where the school committee was not in a leadership position. Unfortunately, nobody was then nominated, and I feel that Amanda Bailey over there has taken the mantle to really help get things moving, and I feel really bad for that extra load that you've had to carry, and everybody, who participates in this. We can't afford to have an issue with communication with parents right now, or ever, but, this is a time to really come together, and I think we dropped the ball from the beginning. So I was going to suggest that maybe at our workshop, we make this, because communication has been a priority, and this to me is sort of a keystone in that whole discussion.
Okay, Lakshmi.
Sorry. I think a couple of months ago, I think I communicated saying I would not be attending PTSO meetings.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
I see my name there, and you said 3, so I was just a little concerned.
No. You see your name under our briefing notes at the beginning of the year when we assigned it. It's a copy and paste for every agenda.
Okay.
So.
So as long as there's no expectation that I would be there, I
Okay.
think that would be fine.
Clear.
I didn't know that she wouldn't be there.
Okay. So then it's my bad that I didn't communicate to the rest of you that Lakshmi had withdrawn her name. All right. So I think it's a good point. I think maybe we talk about it more at the workshop, but we probably need to reach out to the joint PTSOs and maybe have some time with them too to sort of discuss what the structure looks like moving forward. Maybe Monday, which is the next joint PTSO meeting. Are you available on Monday?
I will absolutely be there this Monday, and yeah, I think that would be great to discuss, and then I can bring it back to the school committee, and then we can all get on the same page.
Excellent. Thank you. Hi, Yanshin.
I was trying to preserve my voice. Is the joint PTSO meeting virtual? Okay, so
7 p.m.
I was looking for the Zoom link, but
I will get it to you.
okay.
Amanda, when you create the Zoom link, do you mind sending it to the school committee shell so everyone on the school committee knows that it's... But we can't have a quorum. Thank you, Peter.
Spreadsheets, sign up.
Can I see by a show of hands who is planning on attending the joint PTSO meeting?
Do you need a quorum for that?
No, we don't want to have a quorum because then we'd have to post it.
Oh, okay.
Unless we have a quorum and then we could post it, but that would be a bit of a nightmare.
But then even if Andrew goes, we'd be fine with
Okay.
those 3.
All right. So at this point, it's Yenshin and Becca. All right. Thank you. All right. Moving on to the school committee goal update. And I am going to start this with a reminder that we do have 3 committee members whose terms are up this year. And we met a candidate earlier this evening. Nomination papers are available in both Acton and Boxborough already. Papers for Acton are due March 19th, and Boxborough they're due March 28th. And I'm going to politely request that maybe I go around the room and ask those people whose terms are up if you're intending to run again.
I am. I'm going to be here.
All right. Liz is eagerly running again. Rebecca.
Though I had intended to run again and probably stay here because I do love this work and I like this group of people especially. I did start working full time. It's been almost a year and it is hard, and I have 3 kids and boy did I underestimate that transition. So I'm really excited to hear, that Glenn is running and some other people I'm excited about. I think you all will be in good hands, and I intend to continue to work in other capacities in town and volunteer, and you have not seen the last of me.
I eagerly look forward to your emails to the school committee shell on topics that you have a great deal of knowledge on, and thank you. Ginny, let's make it official, Ginny.
I will not be running.
All right, thank you. Okay, so there are 2 seats available in Acton. There is 1 seat available in Boxborough with an incumbent running for that seat. Thank you all. Continuing on school committee communication update. Leela.
I hope that all of the members of the school committee at least have reached out to their electeds, letting them know that we are in quite the pickle, funding-wise. And if you aren't on the committee, you also can reach out if you're anyone who lives anywhere in Massachusetts. Also, just an update to the committee. They finally assigned people to committees at the legislature, and now Rep. Cataldo is on the Joint Committee on Education, not our other rep anymore. So if you live in Dan's district and you just want to CC Simon on it, just to let him know again, feel free to do that.
Thank you. And I will share that I think most of you saw that I did reach out to our legislators asking them to renew the remote meeting options. I've gotten responses from 2 of the 3 of them saying that they're aware of it. There are a couple bills that are up that they're looking at. But there is an impending deadline, I believe it's the end of March, where we won't be able to meet remotely anymore unless there's action taken on the State House. Ben.
I want to piggyback onto Leela's comment. Not only should you reach out to your state rep or state senator, but let our congresswoman know that we are in dire need for additional funding and that our congresswoman should reach out to our state senator and state rep to say, hey, look, my constituents are concerned.
Thank you. Peter.
I'm going to be sending you an email, most likely tomorrow. I just have not had time to send it. But I think a lot of you heard of, it was Project 211, which was to bring additional funding to the 211 now school districts that are in hold harmless status. Project 211 has now been rebranded to 11 plus 21, because now there's 233 or 232 school districts that have now been placed into hold harmless status, and they represent more than half the students' population in Massachusetts. So this is really a significant statewide issue. There is a Zoom coming up to support that on March 4th. I'm going to be sending that to our legislators as well as all of you, but that is really a significant need. I think, you know, and Leela, you talked to this, but I think, you know, right now, Senator Lewis has filed bills. He is the chair of that Joint Commission on Education and the ranking member there. I think probably what he files has the best chance of passing. I know I talked to Representative Saina's office earlier in the year, and they were looking at, you know, Senator Lewis's bill as well to consider co-filing in the House. I'm not sure if that ever happened or not, but you know, really there are bills there to really look hard at the funding formula. Senator Lewis is probably will have the most legs as it gets into the legislative cycle. So I would encourage you to take a look at that and consider going to the webinar for Project 211 plus 21.
Thanks, Peter. Any other communication updates, outreach? I will say that in the conversations that I've had with the town of Boxborough leadership, they're all well aware of the situation that we're in. I think they understand that we've cut as much as we can. We were pretty clear to them, both at the Select Board and the Finance Committee. I'm getting a similar sense from Acton leadership as well. So we're not in need of as much significant outreach as we did last year to sort of communicate the tough spot that we're in. I would encourage any parents, residents of Acton and Boxborough to come and speak at town meeting when our budgets do come up. There's still a great deal of advocacy and knowledge sharing that needs to happen with the town as a whole. So if you're not in the schools, if you're not a teacher, if you're not a parent, you may not really understand the challenge that we're in. So during town meetings, a great opportunity when we're presenting our budgets to make some comments on that. Ginny.
I would also encourage all of our educators and parents to reach out to our state legislative delegation. The foundation formula has been out of date. It has been studied. It has been reviewed. There have been reports. It has not been meaningfully overhauled. And, you know, we've cut more than we can, and we're not in any better shape, despite all of our outreach to the legislature over many years now. So I would really encourage educators and parents to make their concerns about what they're seeing, how this is impacting the jobs that they do, and how it is impacting their children and their families, as you know, as often as you possibly can.
Thank you. It makes a difference. They've told us directly, the more outreach they get, the more it makes a difference to them. All right, we're going to move on to our consent agenda. So items on the consent agenda do not usually require discussion and are approved with one vote unless any member would like to hold an item for discussion or separate vote. I'll read each item, and if a member would like to have it held, please say so. Members do not need to have attended a meeting to vote on the minutes. Item number 1, recommendation to appoint Teresa O'Leary, Town of Acton Collector Treasurer, as Assistant District Treasurer. Item B, approval of the ABRSC meeting minutes of January 30th, 2025. And item C, approval of warrants as presented in the packet for 2/27/2025. Given that no items were held, is there a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented?
So, second.
Ben and Leela. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? That is unanimous. In the FYI is our monthly student enrollment and some election information, both Town of Acton and Boxborough. With that, is there a motion to adjourn?
Move to adjourn.
Tori, then Ben. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Unanimous. Thank you all. Have a good evening. 9:06. Ginny.